The alarm clock screamed at 5:30 a.m., just like every other weekday morning. Lisa rubbed her tired eyes and reached over to silence the noise before it could wake up her 8-year-old son Danny, who was still sleeping peacefully in the next room. She had been up until midnight the night before, finishing laundry and preparing Danny's school lunch, trying to stay ahead of the endless cycle of single motherhood. As she stumbled to the kitchen to start the coffee maker, her phone buzzed with a text message. Her heart sank as she read the words from Mrs. Rodriguez, Danny's regular babysitter. "So sorry, Lisa, I'm running a high fever and can't watch Danny today. Don't want to get him sick. Hope you can find someone else." Lisa stared at the message, feeling panic rise in her chest. She had no backup plan. Her mother lived 3 states away, and her sister worked her own demanding job across town. The few friends she had were either working parents themselves or simply not available on such short notice. She scrolled through her phone contacts, desperately calling 2 other babysitters she had used before, but both went straight to voicemail. The clock was ticking. She needed to be at Henderson Law Firm by 8 a.m. sharp. As a paralegal, she couldn't afford to be late or miss work. The firm handled high-profile cases, and deadlines were everything. She had built a solid reputation over the past 3 years, never missing a day, always staying late when needed, and consistently delivering quality work. But she also knew the company's strict policy about bringing children to the workplace. Danny wandered into the kitchen, still in his pajamas, hair sticking up in different directions. "Mom, why are you up so early?" he asked, rubbing his sleepy eyes. Lisa forced a smile, not wanting to worry him. "Just getting ready for work, sweetie. Are you feeling okay today?" "Yeah, I'm fine. Why?" Danny sensed something was wrong from the tension in his mother's voice. Lisa knelt down to his level, trying to stay calm. "Well, Mrs. Rodriguez is sick today, so she can't watch you. I'm trying to figure out what to do." Danny's face lit up with what he thought was a brilliant idea. "Can I come to work with you? I'll be really good, I promise. I can bring my coloring books and sit quietly." Lisa's heart ached. She had always dreaded this exact scenario. "Honey, you know grown-up workplaces have rules about kids." "It's not usually allowed, but Mom, I'll be invisible. Remember how I sat quietly at the doctor's office for 2 hours last month? I can do that again." Lisa looked at her son's hopeful face and then at the clock. It was now 6:15 a.m., and she was running out of options. She could call in sick, but she had used her last sick day 2 months ago when Danny had the flu. Taking an unpaid day off would mean struggling to pay rent this month. She could try to work from home, but several important client meetings were scheduled, and she needed to be there in person. The weight of being a single parent pressed down on her shoulders. Every decision felt like a choice between disappointing her son or risking her job. She thought about all the times she had missed school events because of work, all the evenings she had spent catching up on tasks after Danny went to bed, all the sacrifices she had made to provide for them both. "Okay," she finally said, surprising herself with the decision. "But we need to set some ground rules. You'll need to be absolutely quiet and stay in one place. If anyone asks, you're only there because of an emergency, and it won't happen again." Danny nodded enthusiastically, thrilled at the prospect of seeing where his mom worked. Lisa quickly got them both ready, packing Danny's backpack with coloring, books, puzzles, and snacks. She also brought her laptop, hoping she could set him up in the break room, where he would be less visible to management. The drive to the office was filled with Danny's excited chatter about seeing a real law firm, while Lisa rehearsed in her head what she would say if anyone questioned her decision. She parked in her usual spot and took a deep breath before walking into the building with Danny's small hand in hers. The lobby was quiet at 7:45 a.m. Most employees wouldn't arrive until 8:30 or 9 o'clock. Lisa used her key card to access the elevator, hoping to get Danny settled before the office filled up. The break room was empty, perfect for her plan. "Remember what we talked about?" she whispered to Danny as she helped him set up at a corner table. "Color quietly, and if anyone comes in, just smile and wave. Don't tell them why you're here unless they ask me directly." Danny nodded seriously, already pulling out his crayons. Lisa watched him for a moment, feeling a mix of pride and anxiety. He was such a good kid, mature beyond his years because of their circumstances. She kissed the top of his head and headed to her desk. The morning started smoothly. Lisa threw herself into her work, reviewing case files and preparing documents for the day's meetings. Every 30 minutes she would casually walk to the break room to check on Danny, bringing him juice or crackers and making sure he was okay. He was being perfect, quietly coloring and occasionally reading one of the books she had packed. Other employees began filtering in around 8:30. A few noticed Danny when they went to get coffee, but most just smiled and didn't ask questions. Lisa began to relax slightly, thinking she might actually pull this off. Maybe she could make it through the day without incident, and tomorrow Mrs. Rodriguez would be feeling better around 10 a.m. Lisa was deep in concentration, working on a complex legal brief when she heard Danny's voice from the break room. She looked up to see him showing his latest drawing to Tom, one of the junior associates. Tom was smiling and seemed genuinely interested in Danny's artwork. Lisa felt grateful for Tom's kindness, but also nervous about drawing attention to the situation. She quickly finished typing her sentence and walked over to the break room. "Danny, remember what we talked about?" she said gently, giving Tom an apologetic look. "It's okay," Tom said quietly. "He's been great. Very well behaved." Lisa smiled gratefully and returned to her desk, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking on thin ice. She kept glancing toward the break room, watching for any sign of trouble. The morning meetings went well, and she managed to stay focused on her work while keeping one ear open for any problems. By 11:30, Lisa was starting to feel hopeful. Just a few more hours and she could take Danny home safely. She had handled the crisis, kept her job, and Danny had been an angel. Maybe everything would work out after all, but as she was reviewing a contract, she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. Someone was walking toward the break room with determined, heavy steps. Lisa's stomach dropped as she recognized the familiar silhouette of her supervisor, walking with the purposeful stride that usually meant someone was in trouble. Lisa's heart pounded as she watched her supervisor, Mrs. Crawford, march toward the break room. The older woman's face was set in that stern expression that everyone at Henderson Law Firm had learned to fear. Lisa quickly saved her work and hurried after her, hoping to intercept the situation before it escalated, but she was too late. By the time Lisa reached the break room door, Mrs. Crawford was already standing over Danny's table, her arms crossed and her lips pressed into a thin line. Danny looked up from his coloring book with innocent eyes, clearly sensing the tension, but not understanding why this woman seemed so angry. "Young man, what are you doing here?" Mrs. Crawford's voice was sharp and cold. Danny glanced toward the door where his mother appeared, looking for guidance. "I'm just coloring," he said quietly, his voice much smaller than usual. "Mrs. Crawford," Lisa stepped forward, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I can explain everything." "I certainly hope so," Mrs. Crawford replied, her eyes never leaving Danny, "because this is highly inappropriate. You know, our policy about bringing children to the workplace." Lisa felt every pair of eyes in the nearby cubicles turn toward them. The break room suddenly felt incredibly small, and she could sense her coworkers pretending to work while actually listening to every word of the conversation. "My babysitter got sick this morning," Lisa began, keeping her voice calm and professional. "She texted me at 5:30 a.m. with a fever. I tried calling everyone I could think of, but I couldn't find anyone else on such short notice. I had the Morrison contract review due today, and I knew you needed those depositions prepared for the afternoon meeting." Mrs. Crawford's expression didn't soften. "That's your personal problem, not the company's. We have policies for a reason." "I understand that," Lisa continued, "but this is truly a one-time emergency. Danny has been perfectly behaved. He's been sitting quietly in this corner all morning, and I've been checking on him regularly while completing all my work. This will never happen again." "You're absolutely right about that," Mrs. Crawford said, her voice getting louder. "Because this kind of unprofessional behavior is exactly why we have rules. What if a client walked in here and saw a child running around our offices? What would they think about our level of professionalism? Danny's eyes began to fill with tears. He could tell his presence was causing his mother trouble, and the guilt was written all over his small face. Lisa's heart broke seeing her son's distress, but she forced herself to stay focused on the conversation. "Mrs. Crawford, please," Lisa said, lowering her voice in hopes of diffusing the situation. "I've been with this company for 3 years. I've never missed a deadline, never called in sick unless it was absolutely necessary, and I've worked overtime countless times without complaint. My work speaks for itself." "Your work is not the issue here," Mrs. Crawford snapped. "The issue is your complete disregard for company policy and your inability to separate your personal life from your professional responsibilities." The words hit Lisa like a physical blow. She thought about all the times she had stayed late to finish projects while Danny waited patiently at after-school care. All the school events she had missed because of important meetings. All the nights she had worked from home after putting Danny to bed, trying to keep up with the demanding workload. "I haven't disregarded anything," Lisa said, her voice beginning to shake with emotion. "I'm trying to be both a good employee and a good mother. Sometimes those two things conflict, and I have to make difficult choices." "Well, you made the wrong choice today," Mrs. Crawford replied coldly. "And frankly, this isn't the first time. Your personal situation has interfered with your work. I remember when you had to leave early last month for his school conference. And the time before that when you missed the client dinner because you couldn't find a babysitter?" Lisa felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. Both of those situations had been handled professionally, with advance notice and coverage arranged. She had never let her personal responsibilities interfere with her work quality or commitment. "Those situations were handled appropriately," Lisa said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I gave advance notice, arranged coverage, and made sure all my work was completed on time." "The pattern is clear," Mrs. Crawford continued, seeming to enjoy having an audience for her lecture. "Single parents simply can't maintain the level of commitment and professionalism that this firm requires. You've proven that today by turning our break room into a daycare center." The comment about single parents struck Lisa like a lightning bolt. She looked around the break room at her coworkers, some of whom were also single parents, and saw the uncomfortable expressions on their faces. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Mrs. Crawford's obvious bias against working parents. "That's not fair," Lisa said, her voice stronger now. "My parental status has nothing to do with my work performance. I've consistently exceeded expectations, taken on additional responsibilities, and contributed significantly to this firm's success." "Enough," Mrs. Crawford said, raising her hand to silence Lisa. "I've heard all I need to hear. This conversation is over." Danny, who had been quietly listening to the entire exchange, finally spoke up. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to get my mom in trouble." Lisa's heart shattered. She knelt down next to Danny's chair and put her arm around his shoulders. "Sweetheart, this is not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." "But I made the lady mad," Danny said, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks. "The lady is mad at me, not at you," Lisa said gently, shooting a look at Mrs. Crawford that could have melted steel. "And you've been absolutely perfect today." Mrs. Crawford watched this exchange with no visible emotion. "I'll need to speak with you privately in my office immediately," she said to Lisa. "Someone else can watch the child until you're ready to leave?" "Leave?" Lisa stood up, still keeping her hand on Danny's shoulder. "What do you mean, leave?" "I think you know exactly what I mean," Mrs. Crawford replied. "Please collect your personal belongings and report to my office in 5 minutes." The break room fell completely silent. Lisa looked around at her coworkers, searching for some sign of support, but most of them looked away, afraid to get involved. Only Tom, the junior associate who had been kind to Danny earlier, met her eyes and gave her a sympathetic nod. Lisa felt the world spinning around her. 3 years of dedication, of proving herself, of building a career while raising her son alone, all of it was crumbling because of one morning's emergency. She thought about the rent due next week, the groceries she needed to buy, the electricity bill sitting on her kitchen counter. "Danny," she said softly. "Pack up your things, sweetheart. We're going home." As Lisa helped Danny gather his coloring books and crayons, she caught Mrs. Crawford watching them with a satisfied expression. The older woman had made her point, established her authority, and eliminated what she saw as a problem employee, but Lisa also noticed something else, someone standing in the hallway just outside the break room, watching the entire scene unfold with a very different expression on their face. The man standing in the hallway had been on his way to the conference room when he first heard the raised voices coming from the break room. David Wellington was not the type of person to eavesdrop on private conversations, but something about the tone of the discussion made him pause. As one of the city's most successful businessmen, he had developed a keen sense for detecting unfairness, and what he was hearing set off every alarm bell in his head. David had arrived at Henderson Law Firm that morning for what should have been a routine meeting about acquiring a smaller competing firm. The deal was worth several $1,000,000, and he had specifically chosen Henderson because of their reputation for handling complex business transactions. But now, standing in the hallway listening to this confrontation, he was getting an entirely different impression of the company's values. He watched through the glass partition as the supervisor, a stern-looking woman with graying hair, towered over a small boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. The child's mother, a young woman with tired eyes and professional attire, was trying desperately to explain her situation while maintaining her composure. David could see the fear in her face, the way her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. The scene hit David like a punch to the stomach. 30 years ago, he had been that little boy. His own mother, Patricia, had been a single parent working 2 jobs to keep them afloat after his father abandoned the family. He remembered countless mornings when childcare fell through, when his mother had to make impossible choices between keeping her job and taking care of her son. David remembered sitting in workplace break rooms just like this one, trying to be invisible while his mother worked. He remembered the shame he felt when other adults looked at him with annoyance or disapproval, as if his very existence was an inconvenience. Most of all, he remembered the fear in his mother's eyes when her bosses discovered him, knowing that her job was always hanging by a thread as he continued to watch. David saw Mrs. Crawford's body language become increasingly aggressive. The woman was clearly enjoying her position of power, using it to humiliate someone who was already in a vulnerable situation. David had encountered people like this throughout his business career, individuals who used their authority to crush others rather than to build them up. The little boy's quiet apology nearly broke David's heart. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get my mom in trouble," the child had said, his voice barely audible from the hallway. David watched as the mother knelt down to comfort her son, her love and protection evident in every gesture. It was exactly how his own mother had comforted him during similar situations decades ago, when Mrs. Crawford announced that the mother needed to collect her belongings and leave. David felt his jaw clench. He had seen enough. This wasn't just about company policy or workplace rules. This was about basic human decency and compassion. This was about understanding that sometimes life throws curveballs, and how we respond to those challenges reveals our true character. David thought about his own company, Wellington Enterprises, and how he had deliberately created family-friendly policies after becoming successful. He provided on-site childcare, flexible scheduling, and emergency backup care precisely because he understood that employees with strong family support systems were more loyal, more productive, and more creative. He had learned that supporting his workers' personal lives actually strengthened their professional performance. As he watched Lisa help Danny pack up his coloring books, David made a mental note of several things. First, despite being publicly humiliated and facing the loss of her job, the young mother remained calm and professional. She didn't lose her temper, didn't shout back at her supervisor, and didn't let her emotions cloud her judgment. That kind of grace under pressure was exactly the quality David looked for in employees. Second, the child was remarkably well behaved. Throughout the entire confrontation, he had remained quiet and respectful, only speaking when spoken to. David could tell that his mother had raised him well, teaching him to be considerate of others even in difficult situations. The fact that the boy felt guilty about causing trouble showed a level of emotional maturity that impressed David. Third, David noticed how other employees in the office were reacting to the situation. Most looked uncomfortable but remained silent, afraid to challenge their supervisor's authority. Only one young man, who appeared to be a junior associate, showed any sign of sympathy or support. This told David everything he needed to know about the company's culture and leadership style. David also observed Mrs. Crawford's behavior throughout the confrontation. The woman seemed to take pleasure in exercising her power over someone who couldn't fight back. Her comments about single parents revealed a bias that David found both unprofessional and morally reprehensible. In his experience, personal circumstances had very little to do with professional competence, and judging employees based on their family situations was both unfair and counterproductive. As the scene unfolded, David found himself remembering a conversation he had had with his mother just a few months before she passed away. She had told him that the kindness of strangers during those difficult early years had made all the difference in their lives. "There were people who could have made things harder for us," she had said, "but instead they chose to help. That's what separated the good people from the bad people." David realized that this was one of those moments his mother had been talking about. He had the power to make this situation better or worse, and his choice would reveal what kind of person he truly was. He thought about all the advantages he had been given in life, all the opportunities that had come his way, and how much of his success was built on the foundation of his mother's sacrifices. The meeting he was supposed to attend suddenly seemed far less important than what was happening in front of him. David pulled out his phone and quickly sent a text to his assistant. "Delay the Henderson meeting by 30 minutes. Something urgent has come up?" As Lisa and Danny walked past him toward the elevator, David got a closer look at them both. The mother's eyes were red with unshed tears, but her back was straight and her head held high. The little boy was clutching his mother's hand, looking confused and sad, but trusting her to handle the situation. David felt a deep respect for this woman's dignity in the face of such unfair treatment. After they disappeared into the elevator, David stood in the hallway for a few more minutes, processing what he had witnessed. He thought about the deal he was supposed to be negotiating with Henderson Law Firm, and whether he really wanted to do business with a company that treated its employees so poorly. He thought about the young mother who had just lost her job through no fault of her own, and what that would mean for her and her son. Most of all, David thought about the opportunity that had just presented itself. Sometimes the universe puts people in your path for a reason, and David had learned to pay attention to those moments. His mother had always taught him that success meant nothing if you didn't use it to help others, and today he had the chance to put that lesson into practice. David straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and walked toward the conference room where the Henderson partners were waiting. But his mind was no longer on the acquisition deal. Instead, he was thinking about a young mother and her son and how he might be able to turn their worst day into the beginning of something much better. David walked into the conference room where 3 senior partners from Henderson Law Firm were waiting for him. Robert Henderson, the founding partner, stood up with a broad smile and extended his hand for a firm handshake. The other 2 partners, both wearing expensive suits and confident expressions, were clearly expecting this to be a routine business meeting that would end with a very profitable deal. "David, wonderful to see you again," Robert said warmly. "I trust you're ready to move forward with the acquisition? We've prepared all the necessary documents, and I think you'll find our terms very reasonable." David shook hands with each of the partners, but his usual business demeanor was absent. Instead of his typical focused energy, he seemed distracted, almost troubled. The partners exchanged glances, wondering if something was wrong with the deal. "Before we discuss any business," David said, settling into his chair, "I need to ask you about something I just witnessed in your office. There was a situation in the break room involving one of your employees and her supervisor." Robert's smile faltered slightly. "I'm not sure what you're referring to. Perhaps we should focus on the matter at hand?" "Actually, this is exactly what I want to focus on, David replied, his voice calm but firm. I watched one of your supervisors publicly humiliate and dismiss an employee for bringing her child to work during what appeared to be a childcare emergency. I'd like to know more about the employee who was just fired. The three partners looked genuinely uncomfortable. They had been expecting to discuss financial projections and contract terms, not personnel matters. Robert cleared his throat and looked toward the door, as if hoping someone would interrupt the conversation. I'm sure there's more to the story than what you might have observed, Robert said carefully. Our supervisors are trained to handle these situations professionally and in accordance with company policy. That's interesting, David replied, because what I observed didn't seem professional at all. It seemed cruel and unnecessary. So I'm asking again, tell me about the employee who was just dismissed. One of the other partners, a woman named Catherine, spoke up. We really can't discuss personnel matters with outside parties. I'm sure you understand the confidentiality concerns. David leaned back in his chair and studied the three lawyers. In his years of business negotiations, he had learned to read people quickly, and what he was seeing now told him everything he needed to know about Henderson Law Firm's leadership. They were more concerned with protecting themselves than with addressing the obvious injustice that had just occurred. I understand confidentiality, David said, but I also understand that how a company treats its employees reflects its core values. And those values are very important to me when I'm considering business partnerships. The room fell silent. The partners were beginning to realize that this conversation could affect their multi-million-dollar deal. Robert Henderson leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. David, I assure you that we maintain the highest standards of professionalism in our workplace. If there was an incident, I'm sure it was handled according to our established policies. Your policies, David repeated. Tell me about those policies regarding working parents and childcare emergencies. Catherine shifted uncomfortably in her seat. We have clear guidelines about maintaining a professional work environment. Personal matters, including childcare, are expected to be handled outside of office hours. And if an employee faces an unexpected emergency, David pressed. There are procedures in place, Robert said vaguely. Employees are expected to make alternative arrangements. David nodded slowly, but his expression remained serious. I see. And what can you tell me about the employee's work performance? The woman who was just dismissed. The partners exchanged glances again. They were clearly reluctant to discuss specifics, but David's tone made it clear that their business deal might depend on their cooperation. Without going into details, Robert said carefully, I can tell you that the employee in question had been with us for several years. Her work was adequate. Adequate? David raised an eyebrow. That's interesting, because I'd like to speak with some of her colleagues to get their perspective. Before the partners could object, David stood up and walked to the door. I think I'll take a few minutes to talk with your staff. You don't mind, do you? The partners looked panicked. They couldn't exactly refuse without appearing to hide something, but they also couldn't control what their employees might say. Robert stood up quickly. David, I don't think that's necessary. Perhaps we could arrange a more formal meeting to discuss any concerns you might have. No need, David said with a slight smile. I prefer to get information directly from the source. David left the conference room and walked back toward the main office area. He approached the reception desk where a young woman was answering phones. When she finished her call, he introduced himself. Excuse me, I'm David Wellington. I'm here meeting with the partners, but I wanted to ask about an employee who worked here. Lisa, I understand she left today? The receptionist, Amy, looked nervous about discussing personnel matters with a stranger. I'm sorry, but I'm not supposed to talk about employees with visitors. I understand, David said kindly. But I'm asking because I'm concerned about how she was treated. I witnessed what happened in the break room, and I thought it was unfair. Amy's expression changed immediately. She looked around to make sure. No one was listening, then leaned forward slightly. Lisa was one of the best people here, she whispered. She was always willing to help. never complained about extra work, and she really cared about doing a good job. "What about her work quality?" David asked. "Excellent," Amy said without hesitation. "She handled some of our most complex cases. The attorneys always requested her specifically because they knew she would get everything right the first time." David nodded and thanked Amy. He then approached Tom, the junior associate who had been kind to Danny earlier. Tom was more willing to speak openly about Lisa's situation. "What happened to Lisa was completely unfair," Tom said, his voice filled with frustration. "She's been carrying a heavier workload than anyone else in her department. Last month, she single-handedly saved the Morrison case by catching a critical error that everyone else had missed." "Tell me more about her work ethic," David requested. Tom's eyes lit up. "She's incredible. She comes in early, stays late when needed, and I've never seen her miss a deadline. She's also been taking night classes to get additional certifications. She's clearly dedicated to advancing her career." "And her supervisor, Mrs. Crawford?" David asked. Tom's expression darkened. "She has a history of being particularly hard on working mothers. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. 2 other single mothers have quit in the past year because of her treatment." David felt his anger rising, but he kept his voice calm. "Have any complaints been filed against Mrs. Crawford?" "People are afraid to complain," Tom admitted. "She has a lot of influence with the partners, and everyone knows that crossing her can mean the end of your career here." After speaking with several more employees, David had a clear picture of the situation. Lisa was universally respected and valued by her colleagues, while Mrs. Crawford was known for her harsh treatment of working parents. The pattern was obvious and disturbing. David returned to the conference room, where the 3 partners were waiting anxiously, their confident demeanor from earlier had been replaced by visible concern about what David might have learned. "Gentlemen," David said as he took his seat, "I've had some very enlightening conversations with your staff. It seems there's quite a disconnect between what you've told me and what actually happened here today." Robert Henderson's face had gone pale. "David, whatever you may have heard, I'm sure we can address any concerns you might have." "I'm sure you can," David replied. "But first, I need to know more about Lisa's background. Where did she work before coming here? What are her qualifications? And most importantly, how can I contact her?" The partners looked at each other in confusion. Why would a businessman be interested in contacting a dismissed paralegal? "I'm not." "Sure, we can provide that information," Catherine said hesitantly. David smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "Actually, I think you can. Because right now, I'm trying to decide whether Henderson Law Firm is the kind of company I want to do business with, and that decision might depend on how cooperative you are in helping me right a very obvious wrong." 3 days had passed since Lisa lost her job, and each day felt longer than the last. She sat at her small kitchen table, laptop open, scrolling through job listings while Danny colored quietly beside her. The rejection emails were piling up, faster than she could send out applications. It seemed like every company wanted someone with more experience, different qualifications, or immediate availability without childcare concerns. The bills stacked on the counter served as a constant reminder of her desperate situation. Rent was due in 10 days, and her savings account was nearly empty. She had already called her landlord to explain the situation, hoping to buy herself a few extra days. The grocery shopping had been reduced to bare essentials, and she found herself calculating every dollar spent. Danny seemed to sense his mother's stress, even though she tried to hide it from him. He had been extra helpful around the house, cleaning up his toys without being asked and eating his meals without complaint. Sometimes she would catch him watching her with worried eyes, and it broke her heart that her 8-year-old son was carrying the weight of their problems. "Mom, are you okay?" Danny asked, looking up from his coloring book. He had been working on the same picture for an hour, but Lisa could tell his mind was elsewhere. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Lisa said, forcing a smile. "Just looking for a new job. It's like a treasure hunt, but instead of treasure, I'm hunting for the perfect workplace." Danny didn't look convinced, but he nodded and returned to his coloring. Lisa appreciated his trust in her, even though she wasn't sure she deserved it. Every parent was supposed to provide security and stability for their children, but she felt like she was failing at both. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Lisa glanced at the caller ID, expecting to see another automated call about her car warranty or credit card offers. Instead, she saw an unfamiliar number with a local area code. For a moment, she hesitated. These days, unknown numbers usually meant bill collectors or more bad news. Hello? She answered cautiously. Is this Lisa Rodriguez? The voice was professional, female, and unfamiliar. Yes, this is Lisa. My name is Jennifer, and I'm calling from Wellington Enterprises. Mr. Wellington would like to meet with you to discuss a potential employment opportunity. Would you be available to come to our office tomorrow afternoon? Lisa's heart skipped a beat. She had never heard of Wellington Enterprises, and she certainly hadn't applied for any jobs there. I'm sorry, but I think there might be some mistake. I don't recall applying to your company. There's no mistake, Jennifer said warmly. Mr. Wellington specifically requested to meet with you. He's familiar with your work history and qualifications. The position is for a senior paralegal with potential for advancement. Lisa felt confused and suspicious. In her experience, good? Things didn't just fall from the sky, especially not when you needed them most. How did Mr. Wellington learn about my qualifications, and how did you get my phone number? Mr. Wellington has his ways of finding talented people, Jennifer replied, with a slight chuckle. He's quite thorough in his research. I can tell you that the position offers competitive salary, full benefits, and we have an excellent childcare program on site. The mention of childcare made Lisa's breath catch. Could this be real? She had been looking for jobs that offered childcare benefits, but most companies either didn't provide them or had waiting lists that stretched for months. I'm sorry, but this seems too good to be true, Lisa said honestly. I've been job searching for 3 days, and suddenly someone I've never heard of wants to offer me a position I didn't apply for? I understand your skepticism, Jennifer said kindly, but I assure you this is completely legitimate. Mr. Wellington is known for his unconventional hiring practices. He believes in finding the right people rather than waiting for them to find him. Lisa looked at Danny, who was still coloring, but clearly listening to every word of the conversation. She thought about their dwindling savings, the unpaid bills, and the uncertainty that had consumed their lives since she lost her job. What kind of company is Wellington Enterprises? Lisa asked. We're a diversified holding company with interests in real estate, technology, and consulting services. Mr. Wellington started the company 15 years ago, and we've grown significantly while maintaining our focus on treating employees like family. And the childcare program? We have a fully licensed childcare center right here in our building. It's available to all employees at no cost, and the hours are flexible to accommodate different work schedules. Lisa felt tears starting to form in her eyes. Free childcare had been a dream of hers for years. The monthly cost of Danny's after-school care was one of her biggest expenses, and the worry about backup care during emergencies had been a constant source of stress. I don't understand why Mr. Wellington would want to hire someone he's never met, Lisa said, still trying to process the situation. He has his reasons, Jennifer said diplomatically. But I can tell you that he's very impressed with your professional reputation and your character. He believes you would be a valuable addition to our team. Lisa thought about the humiliation she had experienced at Henderson Law Firm, the way Mrs. Crawford had treated her like a second-class citizen because she was a single mother. The idea that someone might actually value her skills and understand her situation seemed almost impossible to believe. When would this meeting take place? Lisa asked. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. if that works for you. Our office is downtown, and I can email you the address and parking information. Lisa looked at her calendar, which was completely empty except for a grocery shopping trip she had been dreading because of her limited budget. I can make that work, but I have to ask, what if I bring my son to the meeting? My regular babysitter isn't available, and I don't want to have another emergency childcare situation. That's absolutely fine, Jennifer said immediately. In fact, Mr. Wellington specifically mentioned that you should feel free to bring Danny We have a comfortable waiting area with books and activities for children. Lisa felt like she was dreaming. Not only was this mysterious employer offering her a job interview, but they were also accommodating her childcare needs and even knew her son's name. It was almost too perfect to be real. "I'll be there," Lisa said, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. "Wonderful. I'll email you all the details within the hour. And Lisa, don't worry about formal interview attire. Mr. Wellington is much more interested in who you are as a person than how expensive your clothes are." After hanging up, Lisa sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Danny looked up from his coloring book with curious eyes. "Mom, was that about a job?" he asked. "Maybe, sweetheart, maybe." That evening, Lisa spent hours researching Wellington Enterprises online. What she found impressed her even more than the phone call had. The company had an excellent reputation for treating employees well, and David Wellington himself was known for his philanthropic work and commitment to supporting working families. She read article after article about his innovative employee benefits and his belief that companies should invest in their workers' personal well-being. The more she learned, the more she wondered how this opportunity had found her. But as she tucked Danny into bed that night, she decided to stop questioning her good fortune and start preparing for what might be the most important meeting of her life. "Mom," Danny said as she kissed him goodnight, "I have a good feeling about tomorrow." Lisa smiled, feeling hopeful for the first time in days. "Me too, sweetheart, me too."